Hey Denchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and thank you guys so much for putting up with 2 straight days of Undertale. I know it's kind of a burden for those who come here for my reviews, but I'm really happy you guys could put up with it because now you get to have 2 straight days of reviews in a row, and maybe something a little special this Sunday as well. So without further ado, let's get into my review of the debut EP from Puppet. This one's called Soft Spoken. Now Puppet as an artist has been on the scene for a little bit over a year, with his debut release Scribble featuring the Eden project on Monster Cat seemed to have randomly dropped at the end of 2014 and left me a little bit curious about where I was thinking Puppet was going to go with his music. My first initial response when I listened to Puppet, and my first time really getting into the Eden project, was from his track Scribble. My initial response was that it kind of sounded like an Angels Airwaves track. If you listen to a lot of the Angels Airwaves music from the album Love, the synthesizers and the vocals sound very similar to what you hear in Puppet's music. And that was especially true with Scribble, and when we get into this EP, that is true as well. Since Scribble, we've gotten Answers, we got The Fire with Eden, which was one of my absolute favorite tracks of 2015, and toward the end of the year we heard him drop Without Me, which is a pretty long interlude sounding track, but we did find out it was going to be the first track on his Soft Spoken EP, which he had announced. And since then he's kind of been dropping track after track. I got a bit of an early listen, and overall, my first couple listens I wasn't actually crazy about this EP. In fact, it's taken a lot of convincing myself to say, okay, this EP is not going to be drop-centric, it's not going to be the generic Puppet sound we seem to have heard on Answers, Scribble, and parts of The Fire, for me to really fully enjoy this thing. Without Me, as a standalone, makes an absolutely awesome intro. We get some vocals from Eden as well as from Telepathics, and this one could have really built up into an awesome track, but instead of it kind of pushing into a next more epic track following it, we get into the title track, Soft Spoken, which starts off again as an interlude. Puppet's been known to kind of make these really long interlude-ish intro kind of sounding tracks. Soft Spoken is actually one of my favorite tracks on the EP, along with Without Me, because of all the cool sounds used in it and the blaring synths you hear at the beginning of the intro. Soft Spoken is an all-out progressive track and impresses within both the drops that you hear in this thing. There's a key change toward the end which actually sounds pretty smooth, and actually the transition from this track into Enough Is Enough with Cormac and Richard Caddick is actually pretty good as well. From there we get into this kind of boop, 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 and then into this maybe indie dance or disco kind of sounding track, which is the Cormac collab on this one. A lot of people are saying this is Cormac's track. I could have easily assumed this to be a Puppet standalone track. The synthesizers you hear in the background over the entire thing sounds just like his production, and by means of this EP as a whole, you can tell that he's producing a lot more than what we've heard him put out in the last year. Once again, like I said at the beginning of this review, we're hearing a vocal style that's very similar to the kind of stuff you'd hear on the Angels Airwaves album Love, and even though we've got a vocalist that, in my opinion, sounds almost identical to Owl City's style, we hear that kind of different sound interpreted, and I think even though I talked to Puppet about this, and apparently he has not really listened to Angels and Airwaves, that's the exact kind of vibe I'm getting off this. Very punkish sounding electronic rock. After Enough Is Enough, we get into the Pierce Fulton collab, which is probably the most interesting track to hear on this one, called Boy and the Beast. Now, if you listen to this track standalone, I don't think you would recognize this nearly at all as a Puppet and Pierce Fulton track. In fact, it has no sound at all, except maybe the little xylophone at the beginning that you'd hear in either of their music by far. This one's super distorted and grungy for dance music. It's got a tempo change, and it's definitely one of the most interesting tracks. You could probably compare this to something like Sakura Burst collab with Shady and Broadcast. And this one, although it's super interesting, definitely a banger, and probably the only one on the EP, which isn't even a bad thing. The next track, Vagrant, is supposed to be some kind of prologue to the track Vagabond, but honestly this track doesn't really seem to fit to me toward Vagabond really at all. in my opinion, it is a standalone track, even though it's this really long kind of interlude sound. I really did like the beginning of this one, but like I said, because there's so many interlude sounds in this one, that I wasn't really crazy about hearing a third one toward the end of the EP, especially following such an intense track as Boy and the Beast. I think maybe this one could have been left out. It saddens me because I know Puppet said this is one of his favorite tracks to make on the EP. I wasn't absolutely crazy about it, didn't dislike it. It does serve as a good breath of fresh air between such an intense track as Boy and the Beast and Vagabond, but in my opinion it just wasn't amazing, especially with the first two tracks being so very similar to what we get here. Now let's talk about Vagabond. When I said this sounds like Angels and Airwaves, I really wasn't kidding. This song could have come directly from the Love album. And this song definitely serves as a breath of fresh air, especially because I've heard people for so many months saying, "Oh, Puppet's one of my least favorite producers on Monstercat because all of his music sounds the same." This is the track that defies all of that. It's not even really EDM, it's electronic rock in a lot of ways, and it's super punk, it's super rock sounding, especially with the vocals, which we get from Puppet's brother in this one, and Eden. It's also interesting to see Eden kind of take this different route toward rock music where I haven't heard him go before. Also really cool to hear Puppet's brother doing some work on his EP as well. You will hear some signature Puppet synthesizers on this one that you've heard in months past, but this one is easily one of my favorites on the EP, and definitely worth checking out this one. I'm actually really happy Monstercat picked this one as the single to drop as the EP releases, and this one I think will be on the next Monstercat album, the first of 2016, which I'm really hyped about. Like I said, originally I probably would have thought much lower of this, but I really did have to convince myself that, okay, this EP doesn't have to be so drop-centric, and because Puppet's so good with making these interlude type tracks and kind of expanding himself in that way rather than just making drop after drop after drop, which would have been boring and I wouldn't have liked it as much, honestly. This EP was really good, and evidenced by tracks like Boy and the Beast, Vagabond, and Enough is Enough, we can tell that Puppet's expanding into a much different universe than we've ever seen him go before, and I think he really deserves a good rating on this one. I'm going to give it a solid 8. I'm looking forward to seeing your comments, what you guys think about the EP. Make sure to listen to this thing because it's definitely worth a few listens. I've listened to it probably 5 times in the last couple days just thinking about what I was going to say during this review, and I've really been preparing, trying to think of what content I was going to try to put in this. I'm trying to make my reviews a little better quality. I did a couple reviews recently of the Undertale soundtrack and Rusty's album, Even If You Don't Believe, and I thought they were garbage, honestly. I didn't think I put enough time into preparing for them, so I actually scrapped them completely. I may revisit those, so I apologize to whoever wanted reviews for the Rusty album, but that one's not going to happen for a while. I might do it in a throwback review later this year, but for now, I don't think I'm ready to review that album and dig into it as good as I could. And that's what you're going to see a lot of this year, is I might not necessarily be ready to review an album. And if you're a music critic, you might feel that same thing where you have to really take a lot of listens before you can really be pushed into recording something, which is a feeling that I had felt when reviewing albums like Spore's Caligo last year that so many people hated my review of. Savant's album, a lot of them were just really not really well thought out, and I would have liked to make better reviews, which is what I'm going to try to do this year and make my reviews a lot better for you guys. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about this EP in the comments section below. Let me know any albums or EPs you want me to review in the near future. Don't request Siren because I'm literally reviewing his album right after this one. You'll expect it tomorrow. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you later. Peace.